It's been long enough. It's time to actually talk about what happens in True Colors. I was holding off on making this video, but considering how the leaks have proliferated everywhere to the extent that if you spend any time on YouTube in the last couple days, you probably already know all the big twists in this episode, and considering how Disney has just gone completely silent ever since they announced the episode was going to be delayed, I figure I might as well talk about it. So that's what I'm going to do. Just to make that clear, if you don't want to know what happens in True Colors, if you don't want to hear that discussed, click away now. I'm going to be talking about it. Okay? Okay. Sounds good. Now that anyone who did not want to know what happens in this episode is gone, I'd like to apologize for the vague, euphemistic title. What happens is that Marcy dies at the end of this episode. She was stabbed through the chest by a king who wants to take over the entire multiverse. Yes, I do indeed think she's really dead. I've seen some discussion about this, but I think it would be really cheap if she wasn't actually dead, and I don't think this is that kind of cheap show. On the other hand, I do not think she will stay dead. I think they will eventually bring her back to life. We've already seen Maddie experimenting with resurrecting the dead. There was an entire episode dedicated to Maddie and Marcy just 5 or 6 episodes ago. But the real question is how they are going to get Marcy back to Maddie and back to Wardwood. The only thing I can conjecture is Sasha having to escape King Andrias, which I think is likely enough, and to take Marcy back with her. Which is a really devastating image, just Sasha having to carry her friend on her back and trekking back to the town where her other friend, her friend who's now gone back to Earth, lived for a couple months. I'd like an episode pattern after the end of the True Grit remake with Haley Steinfeld, or the Midna's Lament scene in Twilight Princess, where you're racing back on Wolflink to try and save Midna. I want that same desperate, longing, elegiac atmosphere. If nothing else, I want more information about the bond that exists between Sasha and Marcy. Is there more to that bond than it appears? From what we know so far, it seems like the two didn't really know each other that well, and they wouldn't have been friends if it wasn't for Anne. But maybe there's more to that bond, and I would like to see that explored. Now, do I think reviving Marcy makes Marcy's death at the end of Season 2 nothing but shock value? No. But it depends on the execution. I understand why some people would be artistically upset if they did bring Marcy back from the dead. And there are a lot of instances, even in ostensibly more mature shows like Game of Thrones, where resurrections are used for cheap effect. But Marcy is too important to the narrative fabric of the show to just completely exclude. She's one of our main trio. And I also don't think this is the kind of show that's able to effectively slow down and mourn Marcy's death like it would need to if she is going to stay dead, for that death to feel like it's given the gravitas it needs. Now, this is not just because it's an animated show directed at a younger audience, it's because it's this upbeat action adventure show that's more episodic. A show like this is not built to just linger on that kind of grief and sorrow and suffering. This isn't The Leftovers, it's not even Game of Thrones. Those are very differently constructed shows. Sure, shows like Buffy and Full Metal Alchemist that are more genre-centric and are at least a little more upbeat could also tackle grief and loss with nuance and the ability to give the loss enough time to really sink in and really register to us and to the characters. But the deaths in those shows were of side characters, which is an entirely different conversation. I just do not think a show like this, that does tend to be more upbeat and optimistic, could or should suddenly switch to being kind of downbeat, dour show about grief and suffering. That is not a knock on Amphibia at all. I want to make that clear. I love Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's one of my favorite shows of all time, and I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that. But I also would not want that show to just take a couple episodes off from the adventures of Aang and crew around the world and linger on the mourning process for a main character. That would just feel very dissonant. Also, Marcy is just a kid, which adds another whole tragic element to her demise. If Marcy is actually going to stay dead, the show would need to devote a lot of time and effort to mourning her and really lingering on that pain in order to not make the death feel rushed or cheap or just something done for shock value that doesn't actually matter to the characters at play here. And that kind of lingering is not something I expect Amphibia to do, or even that I really want it to do. It's not that kind of show, and that's alright. Even if Marcy's death is reversed, that does not mean it doesn't matter. Anne, for example, thinks Marcy is dead, and that matters. Imagine being Anne. Imagine being spit back out with your new frog family on Earth, a planet these frogs have never seen, and you're traumatized for a lot of reasons, but mostly because the last thing you saw before you left was your best friend dying. I will say that Anne is partly to blame for this. Had Anne listened to Sasha in the first place and believed what Sasha was saying about King Andrias instead of just viewing Sasha as a one-dimensional bully who's someone who can't be trusted, then none of this would have happened. Andrias would have been defeated, and Marcy would not have died. Anne probably knows this to some extent, so that is going to weigh on her conscience. The only faultless one in this episode is Sasha, strangely enough. Call me a Sasha partisan if you will, but she doesn't actually do anything wrong in this episode. Despite what others say about her being power crazy, she's actually not. The middle of this episode proves that. She doesn't know what she wants. She had to let the Toad Army in as a favor to Grime and the Toads. But even though she told herself that's what she wanted, she clearly doesn't want that. She doesn't know who she is without her friends. Her friends are incredibly important to her. At the start of the episode, she takes the music box and takes over Newtopia, which is not a bad thing considering we know what the king's plot is now. And also, she doesn't view this as a betrayal of Anne and Marcy, not really. When she's done, she just acts like it's no big deal and then offers to send them home, which is perfectly fine to me, because that's what they wanted, more than anything, was to just go home. While she does eventually become annoyed by Anne, this is only after Anne, her best friend, completely breaks off their friendship and calls her a horrible person. I'd be annoyed too. And even after this, Sasha is still trying to reach out to Anne. She still tries to get Anne to side with her against Andrias. The absolute last thing she wants to do is to fight Anne, and by the end of the episode, Anne and her have repaired the rift between them to an extent, and they fight together to save Amphibia. Sasha and Grime are in a somewhat similar position to the position they were in at the end of Season 1, their plans having fallen apart and them having to go on the run. But there is a key difference, and that is that Sasha has proved herself to her friends. She's proved herself responsible for her friends. Even if Marcy is revived, that revival will likely come because of Sasha, because Sasha is going to have to figure out a way to get Marcy's body away from Andrias and take it back to Wardwood. And this will demonstrate how much more responsible Sasha has become and how much more willing she is to actually not just say she's taking care of her friends, but actually do it. But the primary reason why Marcy's fate in this episode matters is Marcy herself. I have seen a lot of sympathy directed toward Marcy, and this is reasonable considering her pain and her desperation. She's not trying to be manipulative, she just does not want to be alone. She's just scared of losing the two people she cares about the most in the world. And because of this, she tries to stop them all from going home and keep them all in Amphibia. This is wrong, but you understand where she's coming from. This is probably the most heart-wrenching scene in the episode, maybe the most heart-wrenching scene in the entire show. It's even more devastating to me than her death scene. I love the Dutch angles used when Marcy is revealing the truth, and I love the shadows that fall on her as her friends back away and she is left in the frame completely alone, just like she feels. But most of all, I love the writing and I love the voice acting. It just makes the scene very poignant and heartbreaking. Because of this, calling Marcy a villain or some sort of manipulative, vile person is obviously laughably oversimplistic. Nonetheless, I've seen a lot of people defending Marcy while still maintaining that Sasha is a horrible person, which is rather funny to me because what Marcy does is significantly worse than anything Sasha has ever done. Sasha very much fits our ideal of the selfish person, being the rich blonde who's just trying to fight a tendency to be controlling, but Sasha is actually very selfless. She's self-centered, but she genuinely cares about what she believes will be best for those around her. Sometimes she gets that wrong, but she's trying to be better. Marcy is probably more selfish. Not that she's a bad person, but in the sense that she focuses more on what she believes she wants than what would be best for those around her. She doesn't really consider their experiences. None of this should be taken as some sort of anti-Marcy tirade. I love Marcy more as a character because of her flaws. But Marcy has had a romanticized, unrealistic view of Amphibia since she got here. She didn't have to endure suffering like Anne and Sasha did when they arrived here. She has all these wild fantasies about going on adventures to a bunch of other unforeseen lands that need exploration, and Andrias betraying her and then stabbing her, literally, in the back, punctures these fantasies. Even if this scene does not count under traditionally graphic depictions of violence, as there's no blood or gore or any of that stuff, it's a chilling, visceral scene. They linger on it. And I believe this is the right choice. Marcy dying here demonstrates that this world is not some idealized, whimsical fantasy world. It's not a game, and they make us feel that. If Marcy does return to the world of the living, she'll do it as a different person. She'll do it as someone much less encumbered by the idea of Amphibia as this lovely, beautiful, escapist world. She'll have to reckon with the consequences of her actions and mature as a person, and if this does happen, I would say that her death does matter to the story and to her character. It is important, and it's not just a cheap trick, even if she does end up returning to life. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching Amphibia. I was really spending a lot of time wondering whether I should make a True Colors video, but we've still gotten no word from Disney, and leaks are getting out everywhere, so I didn't really think I had a choice but to make it. I didn't think I could justify holding off any longer. So, here it is. I'll probably be making more videos about this episode in the future. And if Disney does censor Marcy's death, as I'm anticipating it will, I'll definitely make a video comparing the two versions, let's say that. So anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.